Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Damcott. And the title of my presentation is What Type of Girl Are You? Examining the only female character in the 2019 hit film Ford v. Ferrari. Now, I should note that if you have not seen the movie to this point and were planning to see it, there are spoilers within this presentation. So I do apologize for that, but just be warned that there are spoilers in this presentation. So, a little bit of background on the film itself. So, as I said, Ford v. Ferrari was released in November 2019. It's based on a true story of the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is why it's called Le Mans 66 in some of the European countries and territories. And the film basically follows a rivalry between Ford and Ferrari following a failed buyout from Ford. Basically, they attempt to buy Ferrari, and like I said, it ends up falling through. And basically, the two manufacturers end up having a rivalry throughout the 60s. And it extends onto the racetrack. So Ford starts a racing program because they found out that Ferrari has one, and they wanted to compete with Ferrari. So they start a racing program, and the legendary automotive designer Carroll Shelby is brought in to kind of run the whole program, and Ken Miles is brought on as the driver. So the two don't get along much during the first three parts of the film. They manage to overcome personal obstacles, mechanical obstacles, just a lot of hiccups within the Ford racing program in and of itself. And they build a revolutionary endurance car and a great race team and end up beating Ferrari in the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans. Unfortunately for Ken, a few years later he ends up experiencing brake failure and is killed in the ensuing crash and fire at the end of the film. The reason why the brake failure is so important is because that was one of the revolutionary things that Ford managed to do. So for those of you who don't know what the 24 Hours of Le Mans is, it's exactly what it is. It's a 24-hour race. And back in the 60s, obviously the equipment was not as good as it is today in 2021. So there would be a lot of brake failures and early retirees from the race. So Shelby and Miles worked together to develop a brake system that they could change during the race, which is what helped them beat Ferrari. Which is why the brake failure at the end of the film is so prevalent, because they spent so much time working on new and improved brakes, and it ended up killing Ken, unfortunately. So, some notable characters. Obviously, right off the bat, you see Matt Damon and Christian Bale as the two main characters. The film, like I said, pretty much revolves around them and trying to work together. But the one highlighted in green and shown over here is Catriona Balfe. She plays Mollie Miles, who is Ken's wife. Ken and Mollie also have a son named Peter. And so Mollie basically ends up taking care of Peter a lot. So a lot of scenes that you see Mollie in, you also see their son Peter in as well. So the way I put this presentation together is I rewatched the film multiple times, specifically the scenes containing the character of Mollie, and basically I coded for gender representation and stereotypical roles within the character of Mollie. So one of the things I used was something called Symbolic Annihilation, and so Symbolic Annihilation is the misrepresentation or underrepresentation of some group of people in the media, often based on race, class, or gender. I think Kobe's presentation was a good example of some symbolic annihilation within race. Mine will be in gender, obviously. It's widely seen as a way of maintaining social inequality. Some people think that symbolic annihilation is used on purpose to avoid using black characters, female characters, poor, characters who are poor. It's widely seen as a way to just kind of keep things status quo and not basically, like I said, keeping us unequal. So one could reason that Ford v. Ferrari is so true to the point where women are grossly underrepresented, just like they were in 1966. It wasn't that common for women to be prevalent in a film in the 60s. And right underneath I said, the sole woman, Mollie, is misrepresented as a classic housewife. Just like, in the 50s and 60s, women basically had the role of the housewife. They were in the kitchen. They made the food. They provided care for the kids, like Mollie did, while the husband goes out and makes the money for the family. So as I said, Mollie's the only female character in this film. I put an asterisk next to it because there are some women who have one-liners or cameos, but Mollie's the only female character who appears in more than one scene or has a lot of lines and screen time. So we're first introduced to Mollie in a mechanic shop. That's actually what Ken did before he got into driving race cars. He worked in an auto mechanic shop, and the first time we see Mollie is right after Ken sends a car on his way, and Mollie basically, I forget what the car was, but Mollie basically named the car word for word, and it impressed Ken a lot. He responds with, you know your cars, and follows that up with, what type of girl are you? You could argue, it was most likely back and forth banter between a loving husband and wife. But it also, a statement like that probably wasn't uncommon back in the 60s. Like I said, with women being mainly housewives, they don't get out as much as men do, and especially for someone like Ken who works in an auto mechanic shop, for her to just reel off the name of a car like that so effortlessly without like a cheat sheet or something. If that were to happen in real life, I'm sure there were men that were probably impressed by that. So, like I said, this was most likely back and forth banter between husband and wife. However, if a girl made a statement like that, the response statement that Ken gave probably was not uncommon in real life back in the 60s. So as I've touched on, Mollie kind of resembles the stereotypical housewife of the 50s and 60s. Ken's racing career allows him to be the breadwinner of the family, and Mollie's left to take care of the house and, as I said earlier, watch over their young son, Peter. There is a scene partway through the film where it seems like Mollie shows her displeasure with Ken and her general in a scene. The two are driving in the family vehicle, and this was just after Shelby had brought up to Ken the possibility of starting a race team for Ford. Ken had told Mollie that he was going to retire. So Ken brings up the idea of returning to racing, and Mollie gets upset because not only is Ken thinking about breaking that promise, it's also going to revert her to the role of housewife, where she will be, just left taking care of Peter, probably at least half of the week, if not longer, while Ken is out, racing cars and risking his life. And in response, kind of a humorous part of the film, Mollie's driving the car, so she ends up slamming on the gas and driving very dangerously and recklessly through traffic, despite Ken's alarmed pleas for her to slow down. She wouldn't until finally she slammed on the brakes, and they finally talked it out. As you can guess, Mollie allowed Ken to return to racing, and that's kind of the point where the film took off, and we get into the problems with Ford and building that race team. So there are some similarities to the racing industry today. Mollie's role as housewife is kind of similar to those of the wives of racing drivers today in 2021. Usually, wives of drivers do not work. They either have not had a job in the first place, or they quit their job, or in the case of some drivers, their wives are former cheerleaders for the NFL, so they retire and let the husband do what he loves, which is drive. And these people are usually referred to as trophy wives. But I will say that they do run the charity or the foundation that's named after their husband. There are a lot of wives who do that. They take over sort of the business side of things for their husband. But at the same time, they also wouldn't be in that position to run the charity if they didn't marry that driver. And also similar to Mollie, most drivers have kids. They have a family. This is one of the biggest similarities to Mollie because Mollie had to watch Peter a lot, and with a bunch of the racing wives, they have to watch their young kids as well while their husband is out racing. It's a little different from 1966 because now, families like to come to the racetrack together. They sleep in a motorhome in the infield of the track, so they're with their husband, but they still are in charge of kind of watching their kid while the husband is out making laps around the track. There are female drivers, such as Danica Patrick, who is pictured here, Simona Di Silvestro, and Catherine Legg. They've all gotten to compete in auto racing, which is kind of different from the 60s. I believe there was only one or two female drivers in general back in the 60s. They've all gotten to compete along with a bunch of other women, but they weren't, and today they still aren't as near as successful as men. I know Danica Patrick got a win in IndyCar. Simona Di Silvestro had a podium, and Catherine Legg is doing well in the sports car series. But obviously, compared to, nowadays it's still 90% men, 10% women. There's not near as much success still as the men. So in conclusion, Mollie does lead the way for women in this film. Unfortunately, it's because she's the only woman in this film. And her relationship with Ken, although it was cute and loving at times, there was a scene of them dancing together in an air hangar where they were working on various Ford cars. There was a scene of them dancing together, and it was very cute. It was also turbulent because Ken's racing career got in the way of the family, and it affected Mollie physically and mentally. And following Ken's accident and death at the end of the film, there's one final scene where Matt Damon goes to the Miles house to talk to Peter, and Mollie is there, and she seems shaken. Obviously, losing your husband in a high risk career is upsetting, but there is also a sense of relief because now she can quit her job as a housewife and go out and get a job of her own to provide for herself and for Peter. And before I get to my final point, as I was doing this presentation, there were some questions that were asked of me, and one of them was that this film is all about the cars. It's about Ford trying to take down the top dog of Ferrari. To which I will concede that point. Yes, it was. However, they spent so much time on the plot of that there was kind of a loss of female characters in the film. So the film itself was a hit. The plot itself was fantastic, but that was at the expense of more prevalent female characters other than just Mollie. So kind of my last wrap-up thought is that this film has a cultural impact in the automobile and racing industry. But when looked at closer, there's a gender stereotype within the film itself. And if you're looking for it, you can notice it. So in turn, this film also has a cultural impact for gender roles and norms. But as I said, that doesn't take away from the fact that this film was a hit at the box office. It's still a fantastic film. I would recommend it, but there is a sort of a disconnect when it comes to gender representation. Thank you.